She was 42 years old, and she had $9. Not $9 left over. $9 total. It was folded into the inside pocket of a winter coat she had worn since before the marriage, and it was the only money in the world that was entirely hers. With it, she bought a trailer, or what was left of one, sitting at the far end of a gravel lot outside a small town called Millhaven, Tennessee, where nobody from her old life would ever think to look for her. The man selling it had said plainly that it was not fit to live in. He was probably right. But Carol Beecham had stopped listening to what other people said she could and could not do somewhere around the 3rd year of her divorce proceedings, and she handed him the $9, took the deed, and did not look back. What nobody knew, what Carol herself did not know yet, kneeling on that rotting floor the first afternoon she walked in, was that the trailer had a secret. One that the old woman who had lived there before her had spent 11 years quietly building, a secret that would change Carol's life in every direction and prove something she had almost stopped believing, that the people who write you off are sometimes writing themselves out of the best part of the story. If you are new here, I would love it if you hit subscribe and joined us. This channel is about real people, quiet roads, and the kind of lives that do not make the news but probably should. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? I read every one. Carol had grown up in Millhaven, though she had left it at 22 when she married Dennis Farrow, a man from Knoxville who wore pressed shirts and spoke about the future the way people talk about a place they have already visited. Dennis came from money, not the kind that gets talked about, but the kind that shapes everything silently, like water finding the low ground. His mother, Patricia Farrow, had opinions about everything and stated none of them directly. She would look at Carol's shoes and then look away. She would ask, very warmly, whether Carol had ever thought about going back to school. She would say, when Carol mentioned something she had made for dinner, that is one way to do it. Carol had loved Dennis. She had. In the early years they had lived in a narrow house near the university and eaten cereal for dinner when money was thin and watched old movies and laughed at each other's jokes, and it had felt for a while like the life she had hoped for. They had a landlord named Mr. Abernathy who knocked twice before entering and always brought the lease renewal in a manila folder as if it were a document of state, and Carol and Dennis had laughed about that for years. The manila folder, the ceremony of it, and small things like that had knit them together into something real. Then Dennis got the position at Farrow and Cullen, his uncle's firm, and the money started coming, and the house got bigger, and Carol began to feel, very slowly, the way you feel in a room where the furniture has all been moved 2 inches, nothing you can point to, but nothing quite right either. She had no children. That was the part that still sat in her chest sometimes, heavy and specific. They had tried. They had stopped trying. They had gone to one appointment together, early on, and sat side by side on plastic chairs under fluorescent light while a doctor spoke gently and at length. And Dennis had nodded throughout with the careful expression of a man who is storing information rather than feeling it. Driving home afterward, he had said, "Well, we will figure something out." And then he had turned on the radio, and Carol had looked out the window at the highway, and neither of them had brought it up again after that. Not once. Not in all the years that followed. She understood that Dennis had filed the whole thing away somewhere, some drawer of his that he kept locked, and that she was meant to do the same. She tried. The firm grew. Dennis traveled. Patricia Farrow came for holidays and rearranged the flowers in Carol's vases with the quiet efficiency of someone correcting a mistake. And afterward, Carol would put them back the way she had had them. Not out of stubbornness, but because she needed something in the house to be hers. She kept a vegetable garden in the side yard and volunteered twice a week at the public library reading program and made a friend named Bess Holler, who lived 2 streets over and had a laugh that could be heard from outside on the sidewalk. Carol was not unhappy. She told herself that, regularly, she was not unhappy. But the house was very clean, and the garden was the only place where things grew messily, and sometimes Carol would stand in it in the early morning before Dennis woke, holding her coffee, and feel with complete clarity that she had been waiting for something for 20 years and could not remember what it was. The divorce papers came on a Tuesday in April, slipped through the mail slot while she was kneeling in the garden tying back the tomatoes. Dennis had not come home the night before, and when she called, he picked up on the 3rd ring and said, without preamble, "Carol, I think we both know this has run its course." He said it the way you say something you have been practicing. She stayed on the line for a moment, not because she had anything to say, but because she thought maybe he did. She was wrong. She put the phone down on the garden wall and went inside and made herself a cup of tea and sat at the table and picked up the papers from the floor where they had landed and read them through twice, carefully, the way she read everything. In the proceedings that followed, Dennis's attorney, a careful, quiet man named Hollis, who wore wire-rimmed glasses and referred to Carol exclusively as Mrs. Farrow, despite her having said twice that she preferred Miss Beecham, produced a prenuptial agreement that Carol had signed 20 years earlier at the age of 22, believing, as 22-year-olds tend to believe, that the future is mostly formality. The house, the savings, the shared investments, the small piece of land Dennis's uncle had placed in both their names 5 years before, all of it reverted, under the terms of that agreement, cleanly to the Farrow side of the ledger. Carol's own attorney, a younger woman named Grace, who had honest eyes and did not soften things unnecessarily, laid the situation out clearly. "You are entitled to what you brought in," Grace said. Carol thought about that word for a moment. Entitled? She had brought in a used car and 4 boxes of paperback novels and a cast-iron skillet that had belonged to her grandmother, whose name had been Ruth. Ruth had made cornbread in that skillet every Sunday of Carol's childhood, and the bottom of it was seasoned so dark it was nearly black, and Carol had considered it the only irreplaceable object in the house for 20 years, even when the house was full of much more expensive things. She got the skillet. She got the boxes of books. She got a garbage bag of clothes and the winter coat with $9 in the pocket, which she had not known was there until she put the coat on for the first time in months and felt the folded bills through the lining. She moved into Bess Holler's spare room and did not cry in front of Bess, not once, because Bess had enough to carry already, and Carol had always understood, maybe too well, how to take up less space. The spare room had a twin bed under a blue comforter and a window that looked out onto the backyard, and at night Carol would lie on top of the comforter with the window cracked and listen to the neighborhood sounds. A dog somewhere, a television through a shared wall, the particular rhythm of a house in the evening that has people living in it. And think about the fact that she was 42 years old and sleeping in a twin bed in someone else's house, and that the shape of her future was now completely unknown to her. This was terrifying. And it was also, in some way she could not quite name yet, the first true thing she had felt in a long time. She stayed 4 months. She took a job at a laundromat 2 days a week, folding other people's clothes, which she did not mind because she was good at it, and because the rhythm of folding is calming in the way that any small competence is calming. She answered phones for a chiropractor's office 3 days a week. She applied for 17 other jobs and heard back from none of them. She was 42 years old, and she had spent 20 years keeping a house, and her resume was a document that described a life that no longer existed. In August, Bess sat down with her at the kitchen table and said, gently, that her sister was coming to visit for 3 months and would need the room. Carol nodded. She said she understood. She said she would figure something out. She kept her voice steady the whole time, and she kept her face steady too, because the worst thing that can happen to a person is to become the one that people worry about, and Carol had decided, without quite examining the decision, that she was not going to be that person. She found the listing tacked to the bulletin board at the laundromat, a handwritten index card, ballpoint pen, a phone number at the bottom. No photograph. Old Airstream type, Millhaven lot, condition poor, $9 firm, no negotiation. She stared at it for a long time. She went back to folding. She came back and stared at it again. Then she called the number from the back phone. The man's name was Terrell Gaunt. He managed the lot for an absent owner who had given up on it and agreed, as long as the taxes got paid, not to ask too many questions. The trailer had sat at the back of the lot for 7 years since the woman who owned it, Eula Marsh, 81 years old, had died with no family anyone could locate. Terrell had paid the property taxes himself for 3 years before deciding that was enough of a gesture. He had written the card and put it on the laundromat board because it was the only public board he passed on his way to work. "She is rough," he said on the phone. "I am not going to tell you different. Is the frame sound?" A pause. "Far as I can tell." "Steel. She is solid where it counts." "I will come look Thursday evening," Carol said. She drove out on Thursday. The trailer was a 1974 Airstream, or had been once. It sat in its own island of weeds at the back of the lot, the aluminum skin dented and gone milky with oxidation, one window patched with a piece of tin that had rusted at the edges. The door hung crooked in its frame. Inside, the smell was of old wood and something sweet and musty at once, like pressed flowers left too long in a drawer. The floor near the back corner had gone soft where water had crept in through a roof seam and never been repaired. But the kitchen fixtures worked. The propane line was disconnected, but intact. The frame was solid, as Terrell had said. Carol stood in the middle of it and looked around. Outside the good window, the last light was going orange behind the tree line. A cicada had started somewhere down the road. Terrell, leaning in the doorway with his arms crossed, cleared his throat. "I want to be straight. Roof seam needs fixing. Floor section needs replacing. Whole skin should be resealed. Materials alone, $600 to $800 if you are doing the work yourself. And that is if nothing else turns up." Carol nodded. "You have somewhere to be while you work on it?" "Not really," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "There is a motel on Route 9. Family place. Weekly rate is fair." Carol looked back at the orange light in the window. "I will sleep in the truck," she said. He opened his mouth. He closed it. "All right then," he said. She handed him the $9, a 5 and 4 singles, smoothed flat. He put them in his shirt pocket without counting them and handed her the deed. She put it in the coat pocket where the money had been. She drove to the far corner of the lot and sat until the dark was complete. Then she reclined the seat and put her coat over her shoulders and slept better than she had in months. She was up before the sun was fully out. She had 2 gallons of water in the truck bed, a box of crackers, and her grandmother's skillet, which she could not yet cook on but which she was not going to leave in a storage unit. She walked to the trailer and stood before it in the early light. The dented aluminum caught the sun and threw it back in scattered pieces. She thought, "I have owned this for 8 hours." She started with the roof. The county hardware store opened at 7:30. Carol was there when the lock turned. The man at the counter was named Doug Seibert, broad and unhurried, with the look of someone who has spent decades learning the exact weight and purpose of things. He looked at her list. "Roof seam," he said. "Yes, lap sealant and butyl tape." "Done this before?" "No," he nodded, as if this were not particularly important. "Slow is better than fast," he said. "I'll write it down." He wrote the steps on the back of a receipt in clear numbered order and handed it to her with the supplies. He charged her $78.40. She thanked him. He said, "It'll hold if you do it right," and went back to what he had been doing. It held. 3 days on the roof, moving in sections, checking each inch twice. It held. On the second day, while she was up on the roof, a woman appeared below. Short and solid, somewhere in her 60s, reading glasses pushed up into her hair, a paper bag in her arms. She introduced herself as Nadine Pryor. She said she ran an alterations shop on Main Street, that she had seen the truck and asked Terrell about it, and that Terrell had told her there was a woman fixing up the old Eula Marsh trailer. "I brought you lunch," Nadine said, setting the bag on the step without ceremony. "Ham biscuits. I always make too many." Carol, up on the roof with sealant on both hands, looked down at her. "That is very kind of you," Carol said. "Eula used to make them for the neighborhood children," Nadine said. She was not quite looking at Carol, but at something in her own memory. Every Saturday morning, she would put a plate on the step and ring a little brass bell, and children would come from every direction. Did not matter if she knew them or not. Any child within earshot. She paused. "I thought of that when Terrell told me someone was out here working." Carol climbed down and ate 2 biscuits at the bumper of the truck. They were very good. Nadine sat on a folding chair she had apparently brought from her car and talked about Eula Marsh the way a person talks about someone they have been wanting to describe to the right listener. Eula had come to Millhaven in her late 60s. Nobody was entirely sure from where. She had bought the lot space and fixed the trailer herself, which caused comment at the time among people who thought a woman her age had no business on a roof. And she had paid those people no attention whatsoever. She had been a school teacher for many years, elementary school, 5th and 6th grade, history and reading. She had the teacher's habit of knowing more than she said and letting you work things out for yourself when she thought you could. She had read constantly. She had grown tomatoes every summer in containers beside the trailer door. And every Saturday morning, the ham biscuits, the brass bell, the children coming running. She was not lonely, Nadine said, and her voice was firm about it. I know people thought she must be, but she was the least lonely person I ever met. She had chosen the life she was living, and she had chosen it on purpose, and I think that is the difference. Carol looked at the trailer, at the milky aluminum in the afternoon light. She sounds like someone I would have liked, she said. Nadine considered this with the same care she gave a difficult seam. Then she said, "Yes, I think you are right." The roof was done by the end of the week. The floor took longer. When Carol pulled up the softened section with the pry bar she had borrowed from Terrell, she found the water damage went deeper than she had hoped, down through the subfloor. She worked methodically, section by section, cutting away what was bad and making sure the edges of what remained were dry and sound before she moved on. It was while she was pulling the 4th section, farther from the damaged wall than she had expected to need to go, that she found something that was not floor. A tin box. Small, about the size of a recipe card box, painted green that had faded to something close to sage, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with old fabric tape, the kind that actually holds. Placed beneath a secondary piece of plywood fitted into the subfloor not as a repair, but as something deliberate, cut to fit, laid flat and flush. The work of someone who had thought it through. If you have been enjoying this story, This is the moment to hit subscribe, because what Carol found next is where everything changes, and I do not want you to miss it. These stories find their way to the people who need them. Carol set the tin on the kitchen counter and looked at it. She was not ready yet. Something in her wanted to finish the floor first, to complete what she had come to do before she looked at anything else. It felt important. It felt like the kind of thing Eula Marsh would have understood without needing to be told. She finished the floor over the next 2 days. New plywood, screwed down solid. A length of vinyl flooring from Doug Seibert, who had a partial roll left from another job and sold it to her at cost, which was his way of doing a kindness without calling it one. On the evening the last piece of flooring was down, even and solid and finished, Carol made coffee on the propane stove and sat at the small table by the good window and opened the tin. Inside was a letter, and beneath the letter, nested in a square of flannel, a small brass key with a paper tag on the ring. The tag read, in neat handwriting, First National Bank of Millhaven, 9 Clement Street, Box 144. The letter was written in the handwriting of a generation that had learned penmanship in school, even loops, careful spacing, letters that leaned slightly right as if they were walking somewhere with purpose. It was addressed to no one in particular. The first line read, "If you found this, you fixed the floor. That means you stayed. Most people would not have." Carol read slowly. Eula Marsh had taught 5th and 6th grade in Johnson City for 23 years, history and reading, which she considered the only 2 subjects a person truly needed to start with. She had never married, not because the chance had not come, but because she had decided, at 29, after a long conversation with herself, that the particular life being offered to her was not the one she wanted, and that waiting for the right one was better than accepting the wrong one. She had saved, carefully and consistently, for 4 decades. She had bought the trailer when she retired because she loved small spaces where everything serves a purpose, and because she had wanted to spend her last years somewhere no one would expect to find her, and she had found, in the event, that this was its own kind of contentment. The money was in the safe deposit box. She named the amount plainly, $41,000 in Series EE savings bonds, fully matured. She had been buying them since 1967 on a teacher's salary, $50 at a time, and she had never touched them. She had 2 nieces she had not spoken to in 15 years and did not intend to. The box and its key and whatever it held belonged to whoever fixed the floor, because whoever fixed the floor had stayed, and because staying, in her experience of a long life, was the most reliable thing you could know about a person. Near the end of the letter, she wrote, "I spent 11 years in this trailer, and I never once wished I had spent them somewhere larger. I wish I had had more Saturdays. I wish I had rung that bell more often. That is all I would change. Do something with this that stays." The last line, "Do not let anyone tell you it is too late. I started everything I was proudest of after 60. You have more time than you think." Carol sat with the letter for a long while. Outside, the lot was quiet and dark. Somewhere across the road a nightbird called, patient and unhurried. She folded the letter back along its original creases and put it in the box and put the box on the shelf above the sink where she could see it. Then she went to bed. The First National Bank of Millhaven was a low brick building on Clement Street, with a plate glass window and a sign that looked unchanged since 1989. The woman at the counter, whose badge said Dorothy, matched the key to the box number without comment and led Carol to the vault with the manner of someone who has opened many safe deposit boxes and understands that what is inside is none of her business. The box held $41,000 in Series EE savings bonds, rubber-banded into a neat stack, and beneath them a second letter, shorter than the first, same careful hand. 3 sentences. These are fully matured. Cash them when you are ready. And do not let anyone make you feel you owe them an explanation for what you do next. Carol sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes. The bonds were in the manila envelope Dorothy had provided, on the passenger's seat. She watched Millhaven go about its afternoon. A woman with a stroller. 2 teenagers on the corner. A delivery truck making the wide turn at the intersection. She thought about Dennis. She thought about the word entitled. The way his attorney had used it. Clean and closed, like a door shutting in a hallway. She thought about Patricia Farrow moving her flowers 2 inches. She thought about the laundromat, the 17 unanswered applications, the blue comforter on the twin bed. Then she thought about the ham biscuits, the bell ringing, the children coming from every direction. She drove back to the trailer. The building on Clement Street, 100 yards from the bank, had been a hardware store before it emptied out 3 years back. Its windows were soaped over, its brick facade solid and plain, and about twice the size of what Carol needed, which meant it was exactly right. She had been looking at it every time she drove past. She called the number on the for-lease sign. The owner was a man in Chattanooga named Arthur Vance, who had inherited the building and had no attachment to it, except that he preferred not to sell. He wanted $800 a month. Carol offered $650 and explained what she planned to do with the space. Arthur Vance was quiet for a moment, and then said $675. She said yes. She went to Doug Seibert the next morning. He stood in the empty building with her, looked up at the ceiling, around at the walls, down at the floor. Good pine. Electrical needed updating. Bones were solid. He said he had assessed this building twice before for people who had talked about doing something with it and then gone away, so he would believe her when she signed a lease and not before. She brought him a copy that afternoon. He looked at it. He nodded once. He said he would put a list together. Terrell walked through the space with her the following week and stood in the middle of the empty floor and said, "Good bones." And Carol smiled, because Doug had said the same thing, and she was beginning to understand that in Millhaven this was the highest available praise. "My daughter reads everything she can find," Terrell said. "Used to walk to the branch library that's been closed 2 years now. What does she like? Dogs and mysteries." "I will keep that in mind," Carol said, "when I am ordering stock." The work took 4 months. Carol did what she could herself and hired out what she could not. And the bonds covered it. The shelving, the electrical, the refinished pine floor, the first year of operating costs, and the books, which she collected from 3 places. The church sale on Elm Street, which ran to 3 long tables and more paperbacks than the volunteers could sort. The county library's discard cart, where the head librarian, a woman named Priscilla, who wore cats on her cardigans, gave Carol the discard list in advance, so she could arrive early. And 3 personal appeals she made door-to-door in Millhaven on 3 separate Saturday mornings, to families with large collections and not enough shelves. She named the space the Eula Marsh Public Reading Room. She had a small card framed and mounted in the front window, at a height a child could read from outside. Eula's name. The years of her life. 4 sentences about who she had been: a teacher, a reader, a woman who rang a bell on Saturday mornings for any child within earshot. Nadine organized the opening. She knew everyone, and she had the instincts for it. And Carol had learned over those 4 months that there was a real skill in knowing what you were good at and letting other people be good at their things beside you. Nadine put a notice in every window on Main Street and called the woman who ran the county paper, who sent a photographer. The morning the reading room opened, Carol was up before the sun making ham biscuits. She made more than she needed. She arranged them on a plate on the front step and hung the brass bell she had found at an antique shop on Route 9, clear, toned, brass-handled, close to the one in her mind's picture of Eula's Saturday mornings on a hook beside the door. At 9 o'clock she rang it. Kids came. Then their parents, then people Carol had not yet met, who came to see what the bell was about and stayed because the space was warm and the books were there, and the woman behind the desk had the particular kind of quiet that tells you are welcome to stay as long as you like. Terrell's daughter came with her father that first morning. Her name was Imani. She was 11 and she walked the shelves slowly, trailing one finger along the spines, and she came to the desk with 3 dog books and a mystery novel, and looked at Carol with the careful eyes of a child who has learned not to assume things. "Is it free?" she said. "It is free," Carol said. Imani looked at the books in her arms, then back at Carol. "Every time?" "Every time." Imani nodded, as if this were a contract she intended to honor. She took the books home and brought them back the following Tuesday, finished, and took 3 more. The county paper ran the story the next Thursday. Doug Seibert bought a copy, folded it once, and put it in his shirt pocket without comment, which Carol had come to recognize as his version of saying something meant a great deal to him. Word traveled, as word does in small towns. It moved through 4 people and 2 counties, and arrived at Dennis Farrow in Knoxville on a Thursday evening in February, through a chain of conversations that no one had planned and no one could have predicted. He called her cell phone while she was locking up the reading room for the night, turning off the last lights, checking that the returns were shelved, straightening the new editions display near the front desk. She felt the phone buzz. She looked at the screen. His name. She stood for a moment in the dark reading room. Through the front window she could see the framed card with Eula's name, lit faintly by the streetlight outside. She put the phone in her coat pocket and finished locking up. She walked out to the truck and sat for a moment. The reading room was dark behind her. The bell was still on the hook. Outside, Millhaven was quiet and ordinary and entirely itself, and she was part of it now, which was something she had not planned and which felt, in that moment, like more than she could have asked for. She drove back to the trailer. She made herself supper. She read for an hour before the light got late, in the small warm space that was entirely hers. He did not call again. There is a certain kind of person who, when the bottom falls away, does not look for the largest thing available, but for the right one. Something small. Something that asks only that you stay and work and pay attention. And that you do not give up when the floor is soft and the window is patched with tin. Carol Beecham was that kind of person. She had not known it until she had to be. That is how it usually goes. The Eula Marsh Public Reading Room is still open. Tuesdays through Saturdays, 9 to 5. Free, always, for everyone. Imani Gaunt, who is 12 now, has her own shelf, a small section she and Nadine labeled together, and she refills it every 2 weeks, which is approximately how fast she reads. Doug Seibert donated the replacement for the patched window at the trailer last November, unprompted, saying only that it had been bothering him. Terrell stops by Tuesday mornings to help with heavy donations, and on Saturdays, before the reading room opens, Carol makes ham biscuits, always more than she needs, and leaves them on the front step with the brass bell hung on its hook by the door. The children in Millhaven know to listen for it now. They know to come running. It does not matter whose children. Any child within earshot. She was 42 years old, and she had $9, and with that $9 she bought back something she had almost forgotten she possessed. Not a house, though she has a home. Not savings, though she is comfortable. Something older than those things. The plain, quiet knowledge that she was still capable of walking toward the thing nobody else wanted and making it into something that mattered. That she could fix a roof and lay a floor and build a room where people feel that they belong. That generosity is not something you have, but something you do, and that you learn it best from the people who did it before you, quietly, without asking to be remembered. It turned out to be enough. More than enough. It turned out to be everything. If this story meant something to you tonight, I would be grateful if you hit subscribe and shared it with someone who might need it. And before you go, I want to ask you something real, something I hope you will answer in the comments, because I will read it. Is there something you have been telling yourself that is too late to start? Something you put down somewhere along the way and have not let yourself pick back up? Tell me what it is. You might be surprised how many people down there are carrying the same thing. See you in the next one.